Chris, do I just jump in?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay, diving in here. Okay, well, boy, this is fraught with peril, right? The last couple of talks I've given have been right before lunch, so I was standing between the attendees and lunch, which is never a position you want to be in, especially if you do have a tendency to go a little long. So at this point, Chris was kind enough to give me the session after lunch, which is when everyone's kind of getting sleepy, so that's, I'm sure, fine too. But that's cool. I did bring coffee just so I can make sure I stay awake, which is always a plus when I'm presenting. But I have, as you can tell, I'm a little off on my throat, so I have water to soothe my throat and coffee to soothe my soul. So I think we're ready. Anyway, welcome to this afternoon's talk on services as symbol, or as I like to call it, applying minimum viable product principles to create microservices with Spring Cloud and Netflix OSS. My name is Mark Heckler. I'm a principal technologist and Spring Developer Advocate with Pivotal. If that sounds familiar, it's because Josh is also, he's my teammate. He's my inspiration. He is the wind beneath my wings. And ironically, or interestingly, or however you want to perceive it, we're talking a lot about the same type of content. There's some overlap. But it's really cool because Josh kind of covered one facet of it, and hopefully I'll cover another facet of it, and you'll see kind of how vast this topic is, and hopefully maybe fill in some of the potential gaps that you may have thought of or didn't, will be thinking of at this point forward. So I blog semi-regularly at thehecklers.com, not as often as I'd like, but it is a new year, so, filled with hope. And I tweet very regularly at mkheck. So Josh did ask, if you're not on Twitter, I'll reinforce, get on Twitter. It's a great place to be, right, Chris? Yep. I kind of live on Twitter. I'm on it from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed, and I have been known to wake up in the middle of the night and tweet. It probably speaks volumes about my mental state, but it is what it is. I enjoy it. So that's probably the best way to reach me. That's definitely the best way to reach me. So ping me on Twitter if you have any questions, comments, feedback, what have you. But for those of you who are not on Twitter, don't like Twitter for whatever reason, can't fit your feedback or questions in 280 characters now, I am a member of the slightly older and more established social network called email, as Josh mentioned too. So please do reach out to me on email if you wish. Like you, I have about a half a dozen email addresses, so I just give that one. That's the one I check most frequently, or least infrequently? Yeah, probably. So mark@thehecklers.com. So please do reach out. I'd love to hear from you. So who am I? I have co-authored a couple of books. I have written several blogs and blog posts. I've contributed content and code to other books as well. Some even recognized for doing such, some not. That hurts, but it is what it is too. Frequent conference speaker. I go where they invite me. It's always nice to be invited back too, so I'm hoping maybe next year,
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. I'm just trying to lock in early. But there are many worse places you could have a conference in January, so yeah, I'm in. I am a developer, and as you might guess from the next bullet point, where most of my expertise has been gained, I was recognized a couple years ago as a Java champion for contributions to the greater Java community, so if you had anything to do with that, voted for me. Thank you very much. I am a survivor of many monoliths, and as most of you who have worked on a monolith or in a monolithic environment, you get fairly... It's not that you don't see the problems with them and the weak points, but you get fairly comfortable because you know where the bodies are buried. And I was a reluctant convert to microservices because, again, I kind of knew where the pain points were. I knew kind of how to alleviate them as best possible. So, when you're familiar with the pain points, you tend to kind of just accept those as reality. But I'm also a seeker of a better way, as are you, or you wouldn't be here. I always kind of caution people not to flock to the newness for newness' sake, but new things are essential to absorb, are essential to take in because they bring to bear solutions to problems that may have been intractable before, or that your current solution set isn't very good at solving. So it's good to be exposed to new things, to understand and to learn and to grow, because that gives you more tools in your tool belt. Doesn't mean you have to use them for everything. Nothing is a golden hammer. But it gives you more perspectives and more abilities to solve more different kinds of problems. So these, I like to think of as an excellent real-world example, real-world comic example of microservices. Because you don't just have the Hulk. The Hulk is a rather monolithic system, or could be, by himself. But if you look at the Avengers, I love comics, so you're kind of stuck with this part of the metaphor. But anyway, well, not comics per se. That's kind of tough. The movies. Love the movies. But if you look at this, you have a lot of different players who bring a lot of different unique strengths to the mix. And the Avengers are more than the sum of their parts. And that ends my painful metaphor for superhero microservices. But I do think it's somewhat instructive. So when you go from a monolithic environment to a microservices type of architecture, you gain a lot of things. You gain great potential for resilience and robustness and increasing your development velocity. And Josh spoke really well to a lot of these things earlier, so I'm not going to go into that. Thank you, Josh. That saves me a considerable amount of time. But you do also increase your complexity. There is no free lunch. There's a trade-off. And with a microservices-based architecture, you can get a lot more, at least from an outward perspective, a lot more complexity to deal with. You will certainly need enablers to deal with these things that you wouldn't have needed for one big thing that does everything. So I like to break these down into a couple of different categories. You have some kinds of enablers that enable your microservices to interact, to find each other, to communicate, things like that. And you also need enablers that help us, as another colleague of ours likes to say, the meatware, so that we can understand what's going on in our rather large and complex distributed system. Typically, you have a mix of both. And that's kind of what I'm going to hit on, I think, today. So who here is an old timer in the Java community? Yeah, a few of us, okay. I won't go into the long and exhaustive history lesson, but suffice it to say, in the old days of enterprise Java, it was kind of a train wreck, very difficult, very cumbersome. And early on, there were several folks who saw that this should be better. One of whom was Rod Johnson, who founded what became known and created what became known as Interface 21. Gotcha. Which became known eventually as Spring, the Spring Framework. And over time, of course, the Spring Framework's capabilities grew and grew and grew. But of course, with that comes a greater amount of capabilities, a greater amount of complexity, perhaps. So about a little over 3 years ago, in 2014, Spring Boot went general availability, GA. And Spring Boot allows you to take all of the capabilities of the Spring Framework and then some, and to consume it very readily and easily as a developer. The tagline here, from 0 to app in under 5 minutes, is very apropos. It simplifies your dependency management. It handles, it makes deployment much easier and portable with an Uber jar, which I'll talk about a bit more, but I think Josh covered quite well as well. And some other things. It has auto configuration, which, let's face it, if you have a particular database driver on your class path and you have certain code within your application, Spring Boot makes some logical assessments and says, hey, you are defining a repository, hey, you have a database driver in your class path, chances are you want to interact with your database. So this all kind of makes sense, and it simplifies your life so you can concentrate on the code that adds business value versus meaningless wiring code, which is pretty nice. Can you override that? Can you make particular changes and customizations? Absolutely, but you don't have to, which is pretty sweet. Spring Cloud, as it says, was designed for fragile infrastructure in partnership with Netflix. Netflix, it has most of their source code is open source. So whether we start early on with Netflix or we take something that they've created, which is targeted specifically to AWS, which is where Netflix deploys all of its cloud applications. And we sometimes will take that after the fact and abstract from that, so it applies and is very useful across a variety of cloud platforms, say with Azure or GCP or Cloud Foundry, any of the Cloud Foundry builds. So it gives a lot more value that kind of for free to you as a developer, because it allows you to use something that maybe previously was targeted specifically to one cloud platform across several. So, to kind of give a really quick overview of a subset, because again, this is a rather large and complex topic, or could be, what kind of enablers would you be looking at typically for an application or for a microservices architecture? Because again, you're going to be adding a lot of different things kind of interrelating. Is anyone here a Netflix subscriber, by the way? Couple. That's pretty good. Okay. Netflix is the largest streaming provider on the planet. So they do know a thing or two about making sure everything stays working, reliable, streams, the movies keep flowing, which makes all of us happy, I think. But from the Netflix.com site, that is fed by microservices. Anyone care to guess about how many feed that single pane of glass? About 500. I won't put anyone on the spot, but about 500. And what do you think the odds are that any one of those is the only one of its kind running at any point in time on the globe? Pretty slim, right? So just some simple math, just for example. If you have 500 microservices that feed that single pane of glass, and each one is running 10 instances somewhere on the planet, that's 5,000 different instances of microservices that have to be coordinated, that have to somehow know where to find each other and communicate with each other. So you're going to need a little bit of help. So for instance, with centralized configuration. Now, keep in mind that all of these things, the last thing you want to do is insert a new bottleneck into your system, a single point of failure. Because if you just recreate your monolith in a distributed fashion, you're adding a lot of complexity, and that's it. You're just adding a lot of complexity. You're not actually gaining anything. So even with a monolith, you typically don't want to have strings embedded in your code that point to things that can change. So for instance, if you're accessing a public URI and something changes on that, and you're running this in production, what happens? Your app fails. How do you fix that if it's embedded in your code? You change your code, you do your testing, you do your deployment, and all of that takes time. If you externalize your configuration, you don't have to do that. If you can dynamically refresh that configuration, you can have a zero downtime system. So this is very important. Also, if you're talking about loading that magic string, as we like to call it, externally for a monolith, that's just one thing. But what happens when you have tens or hundreds or thousands of instances of a single microservice that need to be getting that? It makes it very cumbersome if you don't externalize that. So we point to Spring Cloud Config for that. Spring Cloud Config, as I think Josh mentioned, has a variety of different backends you can leverage. Git, SVN, Vault, and file system, JDBC. You can use that to access a JDBC store if you want. But typically most folks use it to back into Git, because Git is already very, very good at solving the problem on how to store text, how to version control it, how to audit it. It does it all the time. It handles those chores for us all the time with our code, which is, again, just text. So Spring Cloud Config leverages Git in most cases to serve up those values to any application, any microservices that contact the config server and asks for its configuration values. Netflix Eureka is what I like to point to for service registry and discovery. And especially in an ephemeral environment, if you have several instances of a service running and one goes down over here, your cloud platform will probably spin up a replacement somewhere else. How do you find that? Well, you have a very dynamic environment there that a consuming microservice needs to be able to find where the current locations of its backing microservices are so it can efficiently find them and leverage them. That's the function that Eureka solves. There are other examples like Zookeeper and Console and whatnot that Josh mentioned as well. I like to use Eureka because it's kind of a workhorse. It's, again, part of Netflix OSS, and it does do a fine job. For a circuit breaker, you need something that will implement the circuit breaker pattern. And just like in your house, if you have a wiring problem in one room, you may lose power to one room. You may trip a breaker. You may lose power to your entire house, but you don't lose your house. And that's what a circuit breaker does, is it enables your applications to gracefully degrade. So it can lose a little bit of functionality, but still keep the lights on for your customers, for your users who are still accessing your system. Netflix Ribbon provides a client-side load balancing, client-side in terms of a consuming microservice. Again, this doesn't insert a new single point of failure. It is Eureka aware, so it will find the instances of a particular microservice that your consuming service may want to access, and it will cache that information. So if, for whatever reason, Eureka goes offline, it still has the ability to find its backing services, the various different instances to access them. For intelligent routing, which allows you to externalize your routing configuration, you have both Netflix Zool, which Josh showed earlier, and the new Spring Cloud Gateway, which is kind of coming in. It's not GA yet, but sometime in the next several weeks it will be GA. So we'll be supporting both of those going forward. You have choices. Again, choices are good. And then you have things like Spring Cloud Stream, which allows you to abstract off of various different asynchronous messaging platforms. Sleuth provides distributed tracing, and of course Zipkin for the visualization and monitoring and management of that. And then Spring Cloud Security for the security aspects. And there's a lot more. There's just no time. So that's kind of the very brief overview of what all is kind of involved in a Spring Cloud or Netflix OSS type of platform. So with that, let's smash this. I always feel like that it's good to talk about things conceptually, but it's even better to kind of see how it works in real life. And that allows you to kind of tie things together a lot better, at least it does me. So that's where we're going to jump off here, and we'll go to here. And let's see, let's blow that up a little bit. So stop for a drink here for a moment. Okay, now, thankfully, Josh covered a lot of the basics. I will kind of gloss over some things, but I don't mean to leave anything essential out. If you have a question, if I gave something kind of a short shrift, and you want to ask about it later, please do. I mean, we're all happy to talk about this stuff and walk out the door following you and talk about it. It's all good. We won't do that. We try not to do that. Anyway, so I'm going to start off with this. Spring Initializer is kind of your home for Spring Boot-based microservices on the net. It's kind of the starting point. You don't have to go here. You can build them manually. You can curl the endpoint. You can use a Spring command line interface. I just like to go here because I think the site is so pretty. I mean, we probably paid several designers for years to build a site this pretty. I mean, don't you think, Josh? Designers, tons of designers. Yeah, this is just the pinnacle. Yeah, anyway, it's not so pretty, but what it lacks in pizzazz, it certainly makes up in terms of functionality. It's just awesome. So, we're really close. I mean, we're like a week and a half away from Spring Boot 2.0 going GA. Really close. I mean, we can see it from here. So on the way here, I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I could show you the 2.0 stuff? Just a hint. I mean, not like all of it, because again, there's no time for that, but just a hint. And believe it or not, Josh and I did not coordinate on this, but he covered the 159 stuff, and I was like, yes, this is the right decision. So I'm going to kind of show you a little bit of a peek at some of the 2.0 stuff, realizing that it's all available out there to play with. It's just not GA yet. But give us another week and a half, and it will be. And then at some point, shortly after that, Spring Cloud, the next version of Spring Cloud will also be. So this gives us a little bit of a jumping off point. I'm going to create a Maven project, but again, you have options. So with the Spring Initializer, if you're a Maven developer, you can create a Maven project, which, by the way, this just allows you to make certain choices. It gives you your build file. It zips it all up, saves it down, creates your main application class and main method, but it doesn't code generate or anything like that. But it gives you a nice head start. So if you're a Maven developer, it will create a Maven project for you. If you're a hipster, it'll create a Gradle project for you. So it's all good, right? No hipsters? No howls of rage? Okay, one. But you're pretty chill for a hipster, so that's good. I guess that kind of makes sense, doesn't it, now that I think about that? No wonder nobody's ever thrown anything at me when I say that. That's cool. So we're going to do a Maven project. As Josh mentioned, we support Java, Kotlin, and Groovy. I'm going to stay with Java for this today, but I do have a Kotlin talk that I frequently do, which is kind of fun as well. I'm going to go all the way up here to the top. We're going to turn this up to 11. So we're going to use the 2.0 milestone 7 bits for Spring Boot. And then to start things off, I'm just going to create a config service. And I'm going to, choose the config server dependency. And we'll save that. There we go. No. Oh yeah, that's cool. Okay. So, desktop. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And open that. This is sliding a little bit, but I absolutely love to stand up when I'm coding versus sitting when I can. I have a standing desk at home on the 5 days a year I'm home. So that's kind of nice. Plus right after lunch, like I said, I mean, I still may fall asleep, but if I do, I've got a better chance of waking up before I hit the ground. So, okay, so this is our config service. The first thing I'm going to do is go to the application.properties file. Spring Boot, by convention, looks for, upon the application initialization, looks for an application.properties file or an application.yaml file. If you prefer YAML for a greater structure, it's certainly fine. It doesn't care. But if you're just doing like key value pairs, you prefer .properties, that's fine too. So I'm just going to plug in some, again, sensible defaults. Typically for your microservices, they'll look for a config service to get those. But this is our config service, and it's not turtles all the way down. So I'm going to, let's see, what do I want to do? I want to at least designate what port this is going to start up on. I'm going to run this all locally. And then I'm going to point to my Spring Cloud config server get URI. And again, whether this can access and leverage Bitbucket or GitHub or GitLab or a local Git repo on a network share, or even something on your hard drive, which I wouldn't recommend for production, but it works really well for a demo, so we'll just go with that. So dev, demos, YAML, microservices, config, which gives me a good chance to show you some YAML, right? Before I do that, I'll just go here to our main application class and enable config server, and we'll run that. And then while that's coming up, oh, I do need to do one other thing first here, though. Let's see. I need to pay obeisance to the Mongod. I'm going to be using Mongo for my backend data store. So you have to properly worship the Mongod to make sure everything's happy. So I'm going to do that. So let's see. Here, and let me blow that up a little bit. So this is the local Git repo that I pointed to, dev demos, YAML, microservices config. So as you can see here, we have some different files. For any microservice, for any application that contacts the config server and says, give me some properties, it will automatically get the properties that are defined for all in application.properties or .yaml. That's what will be served up from the config service. Unless you specify a particular profile, like dev or test or cloud, and in that case, this would be substituted, these values. If your microservice contacts the config server and says, hey, I'm an auth service or I'm an edge service, and identifies itself as such, it will also get those properties specific to that kind of service. So what happens if there's a conflict? Well, more specific wins, so still no problem. What are we looking at here? So maybe something along the lines of, if we look at our application.yaml, we see some very basic properties that we're feeding to all of our consuming services. So let me make sure this started, and of course it did. It's running on port 8888 as we indicated we wanted it to. So let's go here and let's see, we'll pull up localhost 8888. Yeah, let's take a look at our edge service properties, and that's a squint eye chart there. So we can see that we have property sources, and it's pulling in application.yaml properties for all microservices, and then our edge service specific properties, since we asked for the edge service properties. So we get it all right here. It's a way of taking a look at it. The config service isn't overly sexy. It just really works. It's a great underpinning for all of our various different microservices. So I like to start there. Your mileage may vary, but that's kind of where I anchor everything off of. It's where I prefer. So let's go back here and let's go to the next phase. So we're going to do basically the same thing, but I'm going to create a Eureka service, which will give us our service registry, so our apps can see and be seen, kind of like a phone book. Does anyone remember phone books? Anyone? I was kind of encouraged when I got off the plane in Honolulu and I saw this wall of payphones. I can't tell you the last time I've seen a wall of payphones, so it's really kind of cool. I mean, I don't know when I've ever used one, but they do come in handy. I can't remember what airport I flew into, but there was a guy from an international flight who was looking for a payphone because his cell phone, he didn't have service here. And until he could buy a SIM, he's like, no problem, I'll just find a payphone. And I wish I could remember which airport that was, but they had, a couple years ago, 5 years ago, ripped out all payphones. And it's like, it's not that you figure they'll get a lot of use, but there are valid times for a payphone. So, kind of cool. But in the old days of payphones, you would go and find these silver boxes on the corner, and you go in, and there would be hopefully a phone there, sometimes not. Depends on the neighborhood. And then there would be a chain hanging from the phone, and there was, again, sometimes not, a book hanging from that. And that's how when you go to a new city where you had a friend, you'd look up their address in this magic book, and you'd be able to find them and call them. Now, notice you never did with the phone book call through the phone book. It didn't handle your traffic. It was just the lookup mechanism. And that's what Eureka is. That's what Zookeeper is. It gives you a means of looking up how to find a backing service, and then you communicate directly with that backing service. So let's create our Eureka service. I'm going to, I don't need this to be a config server, but I do need the dependency for a config client. because I want Eureka to be able to get its properties from our config server as well. And again, different ways you can configure that. This is my preference. And I'm going to bring in the library for Eureka server, generate the project, save it. Let's see, we'll go out here. Come on, there we go. Sometimes it just gets lost thinking, I think. Okay, so by the way, I'm using IntelliJ, but again, as Josh mentioned, Spring is very familiar with, very friendly with NetBeans and Eclipse. We even have a build of Eclipse we produce ourselves called the Spring Tool Suite, which actually makes cloud deployments a breeze. That's kind of envious, but I'm very familiar with IntelliJ. That's where I kind of put my efforts. The only thing that we do not support, will not support, horrible, don't ever do it, is Emacs. And I know Josh does that just to give me a hard time. And I tell him every time you fire up Emacs, a puppy dies. But he, I think, hates puppies. So anyway, I'm a VI guy. It's just a private little thing. So, and Josh is not going to rise to the bait. So fine, be that way. Okay, he's just making notes and like posting mean Twitter messages, I guess. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my application properties. I'm going to, I do need to say this because when you're leveraging a config service, your application properties, remember, a Spring Boot app, when the application context is initialized, it reads that. We actually kind of want to get out ahead of that cycle and kind of get in the bootstrap phase and tell it, hey, look, get your properties from there, from your config service. Probably the easiest way of doing that is just taking our application properties file and renaming it to bootstrap.properties, which is a convention we follow. So let's see, I'll go with there, and let's provide some basic information. This is our Eureka service, so it will be identified as such, so it can get its particular properties. And as Josh also mentioned, you can point to the Spring Cloud config URI, which at this point is running on localhost 8888, but that's the default. So that's, again, that sensible default, so we don't have to have that. But you can put that, and if you have it anywhere but that, perhaps in a cloud environment, hopefully in a cloud environment, you will specify that as well. So I'm going to go to my main application class. This is our Eureka server. So what I do need to specify is @enable Eureka server. We'll run that, and we'll be off and going. So the first thing that we want to make sure of is that it is getting its properties from our config service. And I'm overriding the port number in that, so we can see the fact that it's loading on 8761 means that, yep, it's hitting the config service. But I'm a visual person, so I like to actually go out and see what we're dealing with. And here's our Eureka dashboard. Now, yeah, that's a little bit better. Now, other than this, which, by the way, all this time, I had no idea this did this. So, Josh, you are awesome. This is great. I'm going to be spending like all evening doing that. Well, after the luau, I'm just going to be doing this, you know. So maybe I'll be off Twitter for a while, but this is really cool. This is a dashboard, and like all dashboards, they are enablers, but they're not enablers specifically for your microservices. The dashboard part isn't. They're enablers for us, right? So we can see what's going on in our architecture, in our systems, in our distributed systems. And there's a lot of good information here, but the key bits are really here for us. One is where our Eureka replicas. Right now we have exactly one running, which is probably not recommended for production, but just does fine for a demo. And then here are the instances of microservices that are registered with Eureka. And at this point, we have an appalling dearth of microservices that are registered with Eureka. We've got nothing. So that's kind of our next step, right? So we've got some of our scaffolding in place. So at this point, let's go ahead and build out something. So this is going to be so exciting. This is great. Does anybody here like quotes, like movie quotes? Yeah. Billy, I'm so glad you came, because even if I didn't get anybody else to bite on that, Billy is my bud. We throw bad quotes back and forth and good quotes back and forth, and it doesn't matter. I love a good turn of phrase. So does anybody here have like a quote of the day app? Nobody? Gosh, you're really missing out. Okay, that probably speaks to how lame my life is, but I kind of enjoy it. Maybe because I can't do a good turn of phrase, so I like it when I hear one. But even movies that are bad, if they're really quotable, I mean, that's kind of fun, right? You walk out and you feel like, I got something out of this. So, yeah, okay, well, you know, it's something. I used to like sports, not playing them. I mean, I never really was good playing them, but I used to watch them, and yeah, that's so weak. So, quotes. I like a good quote. So guess what? You're along for the ride. You're going to see some great quotes today. You're welcome. So for dependencies, I want this to be a config client so it can access our config service and grab its properties from there. I also want this to be a Eureka discovery client so it can access Eureka so it can register with and use Eureka to locate other microservices. Let's see. I'm going to use Lombok because I'm a lazy developer. And lazy in a good way, because if you don't, I mean, even every IDE maker that's out there has recognized that getters and setters and toStrings and equals and hash code, they're pretty much just boilerplate, right? So they'll generate them for you. The problem is that once they generate them for you, you have to maintain them. It was free to generate, but now every time you have to touch that code, you have to wade through these pages and pages potentially of getters and setters and silly stuff like this. Something that could very easily be automated. Lombok helps with that, and future versions of Java, chances are going to have the concept of a data class. So I think it's very useful as a construct, and I've had a love-hate relationship over the years with Lombok, but I kind of love it. And for the most part, it's just an A-OK thing. So I'm going to use that today. Again, along for the ride, thanks. I'm also going to just, actually I'm using 1.5.9. I need to back this up and go up to 2.0, boom, 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 which is a great way of pointing out that this is context sensitive. Based upon what you have selected for the version of Spring Boot is what you will have available in terms of dependencies. These are version synchronized based on the version of boot, which allows you in most cases to avoid the whole game of dependency whack-a-mole. If you're an experienced developer, you have run into this. If you're not, you will, because at some point you're going to have several dependencies and stuff is just going to stop working. And you'll probably have a very difficult time figuring out why. And suddenly you'll realize that when you roll back one version of one library, everything works. And thus you run into the dependency, what I call dependency whack-a-mole. You're just trying to make everything go away and play well together. These are version synchronized, the ones that you choose off the list. Can you overwrite it? Yes, you can. But it's opinionated. In most cases, this just works. So that's kind of nice. Can you bring your own dependencies that aren't in the Spring Initializer? Yes, you can. But it's nice to have a really good starting point. So I'm going to bring in the reactive web dependency, which allows me to use some of the reactive capabilities. We're not going to get much into this. We're just going to barely scratch the surface of it, but I do think it's kind of nice to get started with this a little bit and at least see that it's pretty approachable overall. I'm also going to use reactive MongoDB. Mongo is an awesome database. It is super, super, super fast. It's like it doesn't even save stuff sometimes, it's so fast. I even have a sticker for it. I call it the dev null of databases, because it's almost as fast as dev null, maybe that fast at times. I'm kidding. I mean, I like Mongo. Otherwise, I wouldn't use it at all anyway. But we're going to use Mongo. Mongo is one of the first database providers out of the gate with a reactive driver. Spring Data K and on actually will work with reactive Cassandra and Redis and Couchbase and Mongo, but Mongo is first, and Mongo is pretty darn good, so we're going to use that. So let's see. Let's go ahead and generate the project, save it, and we'll go here. And once it comes up, come on, you can do it. I'm going to open it. There we go. By the way, can everyone see the code? Actually, let me go back one. Is that readable? Yes. A little bit bigger? Okay, we can do that. Boom, boom, font. Let's see, let's go down here. It is set on bigger. I'll go up to ambiguoused, and that should make it the ambiguousness that we can do. I mean, we can go bigger. We can just blow out the doors. So let's see, we'll go to our application.properties. You kind of know how this works. We're going to rename it to bootstrap.properties, and we're going to provide our Spring application name. In this case, it's quote service, and we'll go to our main application class, and we're going to annotate this as @enable discovery client, so it will register with Eureka. Now, where do we start? Well, right now we have a working application. It just doesn't do anything, but it will start up. It will grab its config from the config server. It will register with Eureka. So the first thing I like to do is create my domain. So since we're going to be using Mongo, we're going to create we're going to indicate that this particular class is a document. It will be stored as document, or objects will be stored as document. I'm also going to use Lombok, as I mentioned, so I'll use the @data annotation for a data class, and we'll call this class quote, clever, right, for a quote app. So I'm going to create a few fields like a private string ID, private string for a quote. We'll want to store our text and our source, and that's probably enough. Again, we'll annotate this as our ID field, and then here we'll annotate this as a non-null. This is an instruction to Lombok to say, hey, look, these fields should not be null in a constructor so that we can do this. We can say required args constructor, and Lombok will create us a constructor which has the parameters we've defined member variables as non-null. So it will create a 2-argument constructor with text and source. I also will want a no-args constructor, so let's make sure Lombok provides that as well. And we're done. Really tough, right? That's why Lombok is kind of nice for this kind of thing. So we also want to create a repository, so we'll create a class quote repository extends our reactive cred repository for objects of type quote, and IDs of type string, and that'll work. And that should get us up and running, but it provides no data. And again, being very visual, I like to see the data, at least make sure stuff kind of works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a bean. And this will implement the command line runner interface. All that is when your application starts, it will automatically kick this off. And we will do that. We'll just create some demo data. And I'm going to inject our quote repository here. Now, command line runner is a functional interface, which has a single abstract method called run. And since Java 8, what can we do when we have a single abstract method on a functional interface? We can use a lambda to provide that implementation. So that's exactly what I'm going to do here. Create a lambda. And as you can see, I'm a fairly fast typer, but I've got a lot of great quotes I want to share. So I'm going to cheat a little, and I'm going to copy them, paste them in. So let's see. I've got those here. And bam, these are some great quotes. So yeah. One thing I do want to point out is that I'm using a thing called a flux. Now, with Project Reactor, you've had a lot of different organizations, companies, entities come together and say, hey, look, we recognize that something is lacking in the Java ecosystem, and actually that's even been addressed in Java 9 with Java Util Concurrent Flow. We currently have, I should say, a way to return a value with just the object type, T, for instance. We also have ways to return a bunch of values, iterable, collections, things like that. We also have a way to return a future, a promise of a particular value with future, completable future. But we really need some way to provide a stream of values, perhaps an indeterminate number of values over an unspecified amount of time, maybe infinity. And that's where you get into the whole idea of reactive streams. Reactive streams has 4 different interfaces that are defined. It's a specification. And all of the key industry players have come together to kind of agree on that because it's too important not to. But you can provide your own implementation. There's also a TCK, a technology compatibility kit, which allows you to test and make sure your implementation is interoperable. So things like Akka streams, things like Project Reactor or RxJava can interoperate, even though each one implements things perhaps in greatly different ways. But Project Reactor defines, it breaks out publisher into a couple of different kinds of publishers. One is a mono, in which, as you might expect, you would expect a value, so you can have 0 or 1 values. One is a flux, which could be several values. Could be an unlimited number of values over an indeterminate amount of time. So what I'm looking at here is creating a flux, a couple of fluxes actually, of just these values. Now here are my quotes. These go to 11. Anyone? The dude abides. This is one of my favorites. This is from an old movie from the 30s. I happened to run into this in Turner Classic Movies one weekend, and I just thought it was so cool. It's very dated, but it was actually really well written and well acted, even though it's very clip delivery and stuff, as you might expect from a 1936 movie. But it was a really cool quote. Because at the time, well, I don't want to get too far down the bunny hole, but the quote was, all you need to start an asylum is an empty room and the right kind of people. And in a previous job, I used to have that hanging up by my desk. I actually, like my job now, so I don't do that. But anyway, it's been a long time back. But it's so cool, so we have some really great quotes here across a wide variety of genres and decades and everything else. And then we have our sources here. So what can we do with these? Well, let's bring them together. I'm going to do a flux.zip, and just like a zipper on your jacket, it takes one from each and interleaves them, so it brings them together. and we can create a tuple with that. So I'm going to bring in my quote texts, and I'm going to zip those with my quote sources, and then we're going to take that. We'll map that. So we'll take our tuple, and we'll do a new quote with the get t1, which is our one version from our pair, our one element from our pair, and we'll take our t.get2, which is our other, which is our sources, and we'll create a new quote from this. And then we'll do a flat map. So we'll take our quote, and we'll take our quote repository and save that, right? And then let's subscribe, and then we'll just output this so we can see what's going on. Now this is pretty good. This works pretty well, but there is a problem because we're going to be restarting this several times, and each time we restart this command line runner bean is just going to fire up, and it's going to add more data to our data store. And granted, we are using Mongo, but at some point it may actually save some of these. So we'll probably get some dupes. So what I like to do is just kind of start this off with a quote repository dot delete all dot then many, which accepts a flux. Well, we coincidentally have created a flux right here, right? So we're just going to wrap that in here, and then I will pretty that up a bit. And now we've got something. So we're going to go ahead and clear out all of our records in Mongo. Don't do this in production. Chances are you won't have a command line runner bean anyway. And then we're going to save everything down. So let's go ahead and start this up, make sure it all works. Oh, what have I forgotten here? Let's see. Cannot find symbol. No interface expected here. So, okay. Let's do some team debugging here.
It should be implements, not extends, because you're doing a class.
Oh, God, I shouldn't be doing a class. What was I doing? Oh, man, I just implements. Yeah, there we go. That should make things considerably happier. Look at that. Okay. Yeah, see, I tell you what, clearly I need more coffee. Yeah. Wow. Okay, I'm going to stop and take a drink of coffee. That'll fix everything. Oh, okay, that's good. Okay, so we see we have quotes. So that looks pretty good, right? We've got our ID, our text, our quote source. So that's looking pretty nice. Wow, I'm getting close on time, so I'm going to kind of bump this up into high gear. Again, I'm going to give you a really quick look at some of the reactive elements without really diving too deeply into it. But if you're coming from a Spring MVC world, this is very approachable. You can go full functional reactive in Spring Framework 5, Spring Boot 2, Project Reactor. But if you're coming from a Spring Web MVC background, this is very approachable because it's very close, it's very similar, and you still get the full power of the stack. If you want to see some of the other things where we do this as well, but again, in the interest of time, I'm just going to stick with this. I'm going to create a REST controller, and I'm going to map everything here off of quotes, right? Class, quote, laptop sliding, quote, controller. So what will we want? Well, we need to inject our quote repository, and let's do that. Boom, that took a little while. And then let's provide a get mapping. We'll probably want to return a flux of all quotes, right? Get all quotes. And then we probably will also want to return, a particular quote by its ID. So I return a mono of type quote. Boom, get quote by ID. We'll use a path variable to grab at the ID there, so we know which one to bring back. And then finally, we will want to be able to search. No, actually, let's not do search. Let's just do a random. So we'll grab a random quote. So that's kind of cool, right? That should be a good quote capability. So we'll return a mono of type quote. Get random quote. And we're off and running. So how do we do this? This is pretty simple. Return quote repository.find all. That's good. Get quote by ID. We'll want to do return quote repository.find by ID. Again, this is a straight pass-through, very simple, easy peasy. For a random quote, this is a bit off the beaten path, right? I mean, this isn't typical functionality you'd see done a lot, but I like to do oddball stuff, so whatever. So we're going to create a random object. We'll just call this random equals new random. So now let's do a return quote repository dot count, which gets our count of all records currently in our quote repository, right? And now I'm going to map that. So we get our, this comes back. I guess I should back up just a bit. So if we do a count, that comes back as a mono long. So I'm going to take that and, map to a long int value. So we grab an int value from that or convert to an int. And then I'm going to map that, and we'll take our int, and we'll do a random dot next int bound by that int, which, by the way, I didn't do this earlier, but we can, I'll come back to that. We can convert that to a method reference as well. So let's see, and then I want to do a flat map, yes, or no, actually. So, yeah, flat map. So I take our in and I do a quote repository dot find, nope, dot find all dot element at n. Okay, so that'll work, should work. If not, we'll always think it should have. So let's replace the lambda with a method reference, which cleans that up just nicely. And we have a random endpoint, if all works. So let's go ahead and start this, and we'll see if it does. Oh, yes. Okay, so it looks like it works. But again, proof's in the pudding. So let's go out and let's use HTTPy. I like that. So I'm going to go to 8088, which is where our quote service is running. And I'm going to just ask for the quotes. And sure enough, we've got our quotes. So that at least works. Now what I'm going to do is grab a particular quote. So let's do Toy Story, to infinity and beyond, right? Everyone recognizes that, right? Yeah, okay, good. Whew. All right, so that works. That's a plus. So now let's go back and do a random. Let's see if that works. And that seems to, so let's check it again. Yep, so we're getting various different returns from that. So that all seems to work. So we have our backing service, right? Now we need something to consume it in order to really see this all come together, which I'll have to kind of slide in quickly to make this happen. But I'll just do what I can here. Let's create an edge service. I'm going to remove the reactive MongoDB dependency because that's why we have a backing service to act as our persistence. So what do I want to bring in? I'm going to bring in Netflix Ribbon for client-side load balancing and Spring Cloud Gateway. Hopefully we can do this. We can make this happen. An actuator, I'm not sure I'll have time to really show you much about that, but being a hopeless optimist, we'll see. And let's go here. And come on, Mac. There we go. Open. Boom. Go to our application properties. Rename. Bootstrap.properties. And Spring application name, which in this case is our edge service. Now, again, we're pretty close on time, so I'm just going to show you just a taste of the new Spring Cloud Gateway. Spring Cloud Gateway. I'll say it, hopefully, once at least, right? So this is very simple. With Zuul, it was very easy to set up your various different routes in configuration properties. You can do that as well as Spring Cloud Gateway, but you can also control it programmatically. Gateway gives you some really good capabilities moving forward, like the ability to route server sent events and WebSocket traffic, and to do rate limiting and eventually some blue-green deployments and things like that. Really great capabilities that we're excited about coming online. Zuul, again, will continue to be supported, so that's cool. Oh, I do want to say that this is at Enable Discovery Client. That always helps. So now let's just create a couple quick routes so we can try this. I'm going to use I'm going to create a route locator bean. So let's see, routes, and let's see, I do want to, before I get too far ahead here, I want to pass in our route locator builder. Boom. Okay, so return builder, we're going to build some routes. So let's create a route here. So let's see, r.path, we're going to specify a particular path coming in. Now, one thing that I used to do with my Zuul examples is show how easy it was to create a microproxy, where it would just kind of rewrite the URL and pass it on through to a backing service, which is kind of useful in a lot of cases. And I'm going to do that here. It's very easy to do. So anything that starts with any endpoint on our edge services starts with /qs and then whatever, we want to relay that to our quote service. Kind of makes sense, right? So I'm going to take that path, and then I'm going to specify to rewrite the path, right? So I'm going to use regex, which I am by no means a wizard at. So occasionally I do make bad things happen with this. So if I do and you catch it, let me know. So I'm going to again reference QS, and then we'll start with let's see. Oops. So question mark. Boom. I'll get it right here in a minute. We're going to take the segment, and we're going to translate that to, or rewrite that to, let's see, $segment, right? So we're going to pass that rewritten path to our quote service at URI, and we're going to use our load balancer. Again, we brought in ribbon as a dependency, Netflix ribbon. So it is Eureka aware. It says, hey, you're wanting to hit something. In this case, we're going to be hitting our quote service. It does a lookup in Eureka, or it actually has those values cached. And it says, here are your various different backing services, or instance of a backing service. We'll point you to this one. So we're going to point to our quote service, and that actually will do it right there. So if we do a .build, and we'll run this, then I will, we've got 1 minute, one whole whopping minute. So I've got enough time to hopefully show you this if I haven't made any obvious and horrible typos. And then one more thing really quickly, and we'll call it a day. Okay, so this looks like it should work. Let's go here. So we're going to http:/8086, which is where our edge service is running. And we'll go to qs/quotes. And lo and behold, it works. It passes that request through, it rewrites the URL, passes it through to our backing service. Again, we can also go to quote/random, and that works just as well. So that gets us our, that's my hook, so I'll make this quick. I'll create another quick route because this gives you a little more direct path, or insights how to do a little more direct one. So we'll do an r.path. And I'm going to, let's see, point to/quote. So this is an endpoint I'm kind of defining via our route, here our route locator, on my edge service. And I'm just going to point that directly to URI quote / let's see, LB : // You can tell I'm trying to hurry because I'm starting to make really crazy typos. /quotes. Yes, okay, so that should work. Oh no, actually I want to get the random endpoint. So this will go directly to our random endpoint and provide a random quote service capability just with a simple definition. Very nice, very capable for effectively almost no code. So that's kind of nice. The code you don't write is the code you don't have to maintain. So let's go straight to that, and we'll go to our quote endpoint. And of course it works. I make it a point not to bug my code, so I never have to debug it. It saves time, so there you go. Okay, pro tip. All right, going back to here really quickly to wrap up. So we already did the smashing this. I think we did okay with that. So some helpful links. The top one is the link to the guides, the Spring IO guides. These are really great. They're like bite-sized chunks of stuff you might want to do. How do I use Redis with Spring Boot? How do I create a REST endpoint? How do I use JPA? They're very quick and easily consumable little mini segments, usually take 15 to 20 minutes. There are also some more in-depth guides as you go to the bottom, things like security and things of that nature, which are very long. But generally speaking, it's very consumable, like very quickly. Also, I threw the links for Spring Boot and Spring Cloud projects that are out there on GitHub, as are many, many other things. But please do download the bits, play with them, download the code if you want, build it, play with it. And finally, I don't have the current version of this talk up because, again, I just redid it, but I will very soon. And they're all, this is a meta repo and a link that links to all the others under a symbol. So, in summary, microservices can be hard. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But they also don't have to be. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Leverage the enablers that are out there and well proven and well tested. Build for speed and resilience. And yes, you really can do it. So, thank you very much.